An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. Adapted for radio by John Foley.
Oh, you've got some.
With John Woodvine and Maggie Steed as Arthur and Sybil Burling. And Bob Peck as Inspector Gould.
Somebody at the front door.
Edna will answer it. Have another glass of port, Gerald. Then we'll join the ladies. That'll stop me giving good advice.
Yes, you piled it on a bit tonight, Father.
Ah, special occasion. I'm feeling contented. I wanted you to have the benefit of my experience.
Please, sir, an inspector's called to see you.
An inspector? What kind of inspector?
A police inspector. He says his name's Gould.
Gould? Oh, I don't know him.
He says it's important, sir.
All right, well, show him in then.
Yes, sir.
I'm still on the bench. It may be something about a warrant.
Oh, sure to be. Unless Eric's been up to something. And that would be awkward, wouldn't it?
Oh, very.
Here, what do you mean?
Only something we were talking about when you were out. A joke, really.
Well, I don't think it's very funny.
What's the matter with you?
Nothing.
Inspector Gould.
Mr. Burling?
Yes. All right, Edna.
Yes, sir.
You're new, aren't you, Inspector?
Yes, sir. Recently transferred.
I was an alderman for years, and Lord Mayor 2 years ago, and I'm still on the bench. So I know the Brumley police officers pretty well. I thought I'd never seen you before. Well, what can I do for you?
I'd like some information, if you don't mind. 2 hours ago, a young woman died in the infirmary. She was taken there this afternoon because she'd swallowed a lot of strong disinfectant. Burnt her inside out.
My God.
Yes. She was in great agony. They did everything they could for her at the infirmary, but she died. Suicide, of course.
Horrible business. But I don't understand why you should come here, Inspector.
I've been round to the room she had, and she'd left a letter there. And a sort of diary. Like a lot of these young women who get into trouble, she'd used more than one name. But her real name was Eva Smith.
Eva Smith.
Do you remember her, Mr. Burling?
Well, I seem to remember hearing that name somewhere. But it doesn't convey anything to me.
She was employed in your works at one time.
Oh, that's it, is it? Well, we've several hundred young women there, you know. And they keep changing.
Well, this young woman, Eva Smith, was a bit out of the ordinary. I found this photograph of her in her lodgings. Perhaps you'd remember her from that.
May I see that photograph too?
Not just at the moment, sir.
Any particular reason why not?
There might be.
And the same applies to me, I suppose.
Yes.
Well, I can't imagine what it could be.
Neither can I.
It's the way I like to work. One person and one line of inquiry at a time. Otherwise, there's a muddle. Well, Mr. Burling, do you remember Eva Smith now?
Yes, I do. She was one of my employees, and then I discharged her.
Is that why she committed suicide?
Keep quiet, Eric. Don't get excited. This girl left us nearly 2 years ago. Well, let me see, it must have been in the early autumn.
End of September, sir.
That's right.
Look here, sir. Wouldn't you rather I was out of this?
I don't mind you being here, Gerald. And I'm sure you've no objection, have you, Inspector? Oh, perhaps I ought to explain first that this is Mr. Gerald Croft, son of Sir George Croft, you know, Crofts Limited.
Mr. Gerald Croft, eh?
We've been celebrating his engagement to my daughter Sheila.
Mr. Croft is going to marry Miss Sheila Burling.
That's right.
Then I prefer you to stay.
Oh, very well.
Look, there's nothing mysterious about this business. And as it happened nearly 2 years ago, obviously it has nothing whatever to do with the wretched girl's suicide. Eh, Inspector?
I can't agree with you there, sir.
Why not?
Because what happened to her then may have determined what happened to her afterwards. And what happened to her afterwards may have driven her to suicide. A chain of events.
Oh, well, put like that, there's something in what you say. Still, I can't accept any responsibility. If we were all responsible for everything that happened to everybody we'd had anything to do with, it would be very awkward, wouldn't it?
Very awkward.
By Jove, yes. And as you were saying, Dad, a man has to look after himself.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Now, Inspector, about this Eva Smith. I remember her quite well now. She was a lively girl, a good worker too. In fact, the foreman in the machine shop where she worked told me he was ready to promote her into what we call a leading operator, head of a small group of girls. But after they came back from their holidays that August, they suddenly decided to ask for more money. They were averaging about 22 and 6, neither more nor less than is paid generally in our industry. But they wanted the rate raised to about 25 shillings a week. Well, I refused, of course.
Why?
Why?
Yes. Why did you refuse?
Inspector, I don't see that it's any concern of yours how I choose to run my business.
It might be.
I don't like your tone. Or all these questions.
It's my duty to ask questions. So, why did you refuse?
If I'd agreed to this demand for a new rate, we'd have added about 12% to our labour costs. Does that satisfy you? We were paying the usual rates, and if they didn't like those rates, they could go and work somewhere else. It's a free country, I told them.
It isn't if you can't go and work somewhere else.
Keep out of this, Eric. You hadn't even started in the works when this happened. So they went on strike. That didn't last long, of course.
Oh, not if it was just after the holidays. They'd all be broke if I know them.
They mostly were. And so was the strike after a week or two. A pitiful affair. Well, we let them all come back at the old rates, except the 4 or 5 ringleaders who'd started the trouble. I went down myself and told them to clear out. This girl, Eva Smith, was one of them. So she had to go.
You couldn't have done anything else.
He could. He could have kept her on instead of throwing her out. I call it tough luck.
Rubbish. If you don't come down sharply on some of these people, they'd soon be asking for the earth.
They might. But after all, it's better to ask for the earth than to take it.
What did you say your name was, Inspector?
Goole. Goole.
How'd you get on with our Chief Constable, Colonel Roberts?
I don't see much of him.
Perhaps I ought to warn you that he's an old friend, and I see him fairly frequently. We play golf together sometimes.
I don't play golf.
I didn't suppose you did.
Well, I think it's a damn shame.
I never wanted to play.
I mean about this girl. I don't see why she should have been sacked just because she'd a bit more spirit than the others. I'd have let her stay.
Unless you brighten your ideas, you'll never be in a position to let anybody stay or tell them to go. It's about time you learned to face responsibilities. That's something this public school and varsity life you've had doesn't seem to teach you.
Well, we don't need to tell the inspector all about that, do we?
I don't see that we need to tell the inspector anything more. In fact, there's nothing I can tell him. I told the girl to clear out. She went. That's the last I heard of her. Huh. What happened to her after that? Go on the streets, did she?
Not exactly.
What's this about streets? Oh, sorry, I didn't know we had a visitor. Mummy sent me to ask why you didn't come along to the drawing room.
We shall be along in a minute now. Just finishing.
I'm afraid not.
There's nothing else, you know.
What's this about?
Nothing to do with you, Sheila. Run along.
Just a minute, Miss Burling.
Look here, Inspector. I consider this uncalled for and officious. I've half a mind to report you. I've told you all I know. And now there isn't the slightest reason why my daughter should be dragged into this business.
What business? What's happening?
I'm a police inspector, Miss Burling. This afternoon, a young woman drank some disinfectant and died in the infirmary after several hours of agony.
Oh, how horrible. Was it an accident?
No. She wanted to end her life. She felt she couldn't go on any longer.
Well, don't tell me that's because I discharged her from my employment nearly 2 years ago.
That might have started it.
Did you, Dad?
The girl had been causing trouble in the works. I was quite justified.
Yes, I think you were. I know we'd have done the same thing. Don't look like that, Sheila.
Sorry, it's just I can't help thinking about this girl destroying herself so horribly. And I've been so happy tonight. I wish you hadn't told me. What was she like? Quite young?
24.
Pretty?
She wasn't pretty when I saw her today.
That's enough of that.
I don't really see that this inquiry gets you anywhere, Inspector. It's what happened to her since she left Mr. Burling's works that is important. And we can't help you there because we don't know.
Are you all sure you don't know?
Are you suggesting now that one of them knows something about this girl?
Yes.
You didn't come here just to see me, then?
No.
Well, of course, if I'd known that earlier, I wouldn't have called you officious and talked about reporting you. You understand that, don't you, Inspector? I thought that you were making the most of this tiny bit of information I could give you. You sure of your facts?
Some of them, yes.
I can't think they could be of any great consequence.
The girl's dead, though.
You talk as if we were responsible.
Just a minute, Sheila. Inspector, you and I had better go and talk this over quietly in a corner.
Why should you? He's finished with you. He says it's one of us now.
Well, I've never known an Eva Smith.
Neither have I.
Was that her name? Eva Smith?
Yes.
Never heard it before.
So, where are you now, Inspector?
Where I was before, Mr. Croft. I told you I should use more than one name. She was still Eva Smith when Mr. Burling sacked her for wanting 25 shillings a week instead of 22 and 6. But after that, she stopped being Eva Smith. Perhaps she'd had enough of it.
Can't blame her.
Do you know what happened to this girl after she left my works?
Yes. She was out of work for the next 2 months. Both her parents were dead, so that she'd no home to go back to, and she hadn't been able to save much, so after 2 months, with no work, no money coming in, and living in lodgings, with no relatives to help her, few friends, lonely, half-starved, she was feeling desperate.
It's a rotten shame.
Well, there are a lot of young women living that sort of existence in every city and big town in this country, Miss Burling. If there weren't, the factories and warehouses wouldn't know where to look for cheap labour. Ask your father.
But these girls aren't cheap labour. They're people.
I've had that notion myself from time to time. In fact, I thought it would do us all a bit of good if sometimes we tried to put ourselves in the place of these young women, counting their pennies in their dingy little back bedrooms.
I expect it would. But what happened to her then?
But she had what seemed to her a wonderful stroke of luck. She was taken on in a shop. Millward's.
Millward's? It's a very good shop. We go there. In fact, I was there this afternoon.
There was a good deal of influenza about at the time, and Millward suddenly found themselves short-handed. She liked working there. It was a nice change from a factory. And she felt she was making a good fresh start. But after a couple of months, just when she felt she was settling down nicely, they told her she'd have to go.
Not doing her work properly.
There was nothing wrong with her work. A customer complained about her, and so she had to go.
When was this?
At the end of January last year.
What did this girl look like?
Well, I have a photograph of her, if you'd care to take a look at it there.
What's the matter with her?
She recognised her, didn't she?
Yes,
Why the devil do you want to go upsetting the child like that?
I didn't do it. She's upsetting herself.
An Inspector Calls was adapted for radio by John Foley and was directed for the BBC World Service by Rosalind Ward.